Hello everybody. I'm getting a little bit smoother at the starts of the videos. This is week 3 video, and I just want to focus mainly on the assignment for the third assignment, which is your one about COVID. But before that, I just want to say a little bit about time management. The course is set up so that hopefully you can follow it step by step and you have everything you need. I found one thing I thought you had, and I didn't pay close enough attention. You only got one page of a document called Prophecy of Crazy Horse. So I'm going to resend that to you by email. I could post it on the Facebook group as well. And sorry about that. I had to scan each page as a separate picture, and I only sent one. So if you're already progressing with the history course, you'll notice there's 4 weeks, there's 4 assignments. So I suggest that, especially for those just starting the history course, take it 1 week at a time. So this is video for the 3rd week. If you haven't done the assignments for the first 2 weeks, I suggest you pause. Don't watch this video now. Wait till you've got the first 2 assignments done, and then this will be a little bit easier to focus on. So for this week, we're looking at COVID as a historical event. And, you know, when you're teaching history or studying it yourself, there are certain ideas, ways of looking at it that are, I think I put up a website where you can go to check that out a little bit. There's a textbook that may be used in your schools. I'm just going to get this for you. You might see this in high school. Oh, it's reversed it. It's called Aboriginal Peoples in Canada. And there's a very good diagram in there. Looks like this. You see those 6 boxes there around the circle? That's what I want to talk a little bit about. So you could look for this in your, if you've got high school students or anything, you could find it. I didn't want you to buy it for the course. We kept it simple with that one, Moose to Moccasins, which is a history story. A little more interesting to read. So the historical ideas about kind of understanding an event. I want to add one thing that's not in that textbook. You remember back, I think in the first course when we talked about Aboriginal ways of knowing. Well, if you look in your course guide for the history course, on page 2, there's a little recap of that. And, you know, in the Aboriginal ways of thinking, it's not just sources of knowledge that we read about in textbooks. So this diagram has land, learning from the land, spirituality, stories, family, relationships, time, the idea about the nation. What do we learn from that? The one I want to zero in on is the spirituality, the intuitive side. And how much do we really value that and rely upon it. So that's why you have this reading, The Prophecy of Crazy Horse. I want you to just reflect a bit on how that can help us understand events like COVID. So this is very short. I'm going to read it for you. And think about the time that we live in and how it relates to this. Now, you know that Crazy Horse was a well-known chief. I think Lakota Sioux, if I remember right. So the prophecy of Crazy Horse. It starts off with a little quote. This is somebody relaying his story, okay? Then he was amazed to see that dancing under the tree were representatives of all races who had become brothers. This was passed on by Chief Joe Chasing Horse, a relative of Crazy Horse. He translated it from the words of a grandmother who was present when the words were spoken. This is a statement of Crazy Horse as he sat smoking the sacred pipe at Pao Sapa with Sitting Bull for the last time, 4 days before he was assassinated. Many of these words are often repeated. There's one line often left out, that of, quote, young white ones, end of quote. So here are the words. Upon suffering beyond suffering, the red nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for a sick world. A world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separations. A world longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole world will become one circle again. In that day, there will be those among the Lakota who will carry knowledge and understanding of unity among all living things. And the young white ones will come to those of my people and ask for this wisdom. I salute the light within your eyes where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at that center within you, and I am that place within me, we shall be as one. Now, this is a quote about that. He saw the people being driven into spiritual darkness and poverty, while the white people prospered in a material way all around them. But even in the darkest times, he saw that the eyes of a few of his people kept the light of dawn and the wisdom of the earth, which they passed on to some of their grandchildren. He saw the coming of automobiles and airplanes, and twice he saw the great darkness and heard the screams and explosions when millions of people died in 2 great wars. But he saw, after the Second Great War passed, a time come when his people began to awaken. Not all at once, but a few here and there. And then more and more, and he saw that they were dancing in a beautiful light of the spirit world under the sacred tree, even while still on earth. Then he was amazed to see that dancing under the tree were representatives of all races who had become brothers. And he realized that the world would be made new again and in peace and harmony, not just by his people, but by members of all races of mankind. And this is all taken from a book by Vincent Brown called Voices of Earth and Sky. So I'll send this by email, and you can read it over yourself. So, do you see some connections there with the current world? Upon suffering, beyond suffering, the red nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for a sick world. It also refers, he's seeing 7 generations ahead, and that kind of connects to the assignment about you writing your letter to the next 7 generations. We're not all Chief Crazy Horse, but we all have our personal experience that we can pass on what we have learned. So if I go to assignment number 3 in your course guide, reflection on COVID-19 as a historical event. And in the guide, I've listed some of these ways about thinking. Is something is it a historical event? Is it worthy of us remembering and that sort of thing? So I've put some of the key words on cards. So when you go to do that assignment, try to think about some of these things. Oh, this camera, it reverses things. I got all my nice cards ready and I can't use them, so I'll read them myself. The first one is significance. So is it important in some way? Like why do you think it's important? Maybe it causes other things to happen. Maybe it has, effects that are different. And the consequence, so when the event happens, what does it trigger? What does it shake up? Like, how does it affect you? How does it affect other people? And when you're reflecting on this, try to give some actual evidence, some examples, concrete examples of the effects that you see. Another idea for thinking about historical events is, do you see any patterns? So with COVID-19, you might think about how it spreads. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to ignore that phone. You might think about the pattern of how it spreads, the pattern of how some countries have been able to control it to some extent, to soften the effects of it. Perhaps there's a pattern of the way people responded in your community and the communities that are closest to you. Maybe you see a pattern in going forward. What has changed? Another way of looking at this is the perspective of different people. I'm sure you would find examples of this right in your community, because how do the first responders, let's say well, in a sense, let's start right at the top with chief and council. How do they see it? What new responsibilities have they taken on? Let's think of the perspective of a grandmother, maybe, living alone or isolated. Like, how do they see the world around them? What about the perspective of children? Um, I mean, I can't imagine being, a 7 or 8 year old, and all of a sudden this blanket goes over the community. Like, you can't go play with your friends, you can't go to school. We've never had anything like that in our lives. So how would children look at it? That's what it means, like to kind of put on, the glasses of different groups of people. We look at the news in the United States in recent months, how young people, university people, when it was the time for the big annual, week off or something, and they all go to the beaches, what was their perspective on COVID-19? Because we saw a total disregard for the killer potential of this pandemic, and they still disregarded putting on masks and all that sort of thing. So each group has a way of looking at this. And another thing there might be, when you're thinking about history, who writes the history? So what we read in history books about an event, who's that written by? What is their perspective? And I mean, with Native history, with First Nations and Métis and Inuit history, the stories that end up being read in schools, in textbooks, they're through a certain perspective, and it's usually not the Indigenous one. The way of looking at it is determined by the people that sort of have the power. So that perspective becomes really important. When we go on ourselves to, as teachers, as adults, to study history, to ask that question, like, who is writing this? Who are they talking to? And it's only one way of looking at things, but there are many perspectives. The last one is judgments. So when you look back at the whole thing of COVID-19 so far, because we're still in the middle of it, what do you think about it? Do you judge that it really is a major historic event, that it's causing great changes? And going back to Chief Crazy Horse, to that prophecy, he's talking about all races, the whole planet. What's different now that allows for a pandemic like this to happen as compared to 50 years, 100 years ago? What's different? So it might be the integration of people from all parts of the world, how they interact with each other, the amount of travel, the amount of trade that's going back and forth. So when all these people are moving around, it's very different from when we used to live in a more isolated world. So that's just some ideas for things that you might consider when you're trying to do this assignment. I'm looking for more than a journal. I'm looking for you to think about why this is considered already a historical event. And when you think of the future, what are the scientists telling us about this? What is Bill Gates saying? He's been working on the idea of pandemics for a number of years now. What are they saying? Well, they're saying this is the first, that it was expected by people in the know who know the science. It was expected. It's the first. So maybe when you're thinking about assignment 4, your letter to the next 7 generations, if the science tells us that there are going to be more of these, there are going to be new diseases, they are going to have the potential to spread just as fast as COVID-19 because we are one world in so many ways. We are connected. That's what Chief Crazy Horse was saying, right? All races. So what would you want to say to, let's say your grandchildren, when we're gone and they have to face these new challenges? Is there anything that we've learned that has kept us going, that maybe allowed us to have, a little bit of joy, like to not be totally in darkness when this kind of threat comes along? So that's just a few ideas for you. And I did make a rubric for this assignment, and I was trying to incorporate these 6 ideas. I'll just go over them again. Different perspectives, your judgment on how you think about this, any patterns that you see, any examples, like evidence that you can provide that explain your ideas. What were the causes of this event? If we agreed with Donald Trump, we'd have conspiracy theories, but the science was what caused this. One interesting documentary I listened to talked about the effects of global warming and the extinction of species, the changes of where animals live, some southern species migrating north and south, like spreading out, and humans being in contact in a different way with different species. So the potential for the crossover of a virus increases. So global warming, this is a big idea that is connected to this in somehow. And the last one, the significance. How do you understand the importance, the significance of the event? Just in your own words. We're not looking for big academic explanations. It's a response. So in the rubric, I put 4 things. So the person described the significance of COVID-19, why it's important and who it has affected, in your view. Provided some evidence of the effects, that's examples that you could come up with. Describe patterns of COVID pandemic and changes that followed it. What do you see? Maybe the pattern across Canada compared to the pattern in the States. Like, you can look at it on any level you want. Described more than one perspective of different groups of people, like how they would look at COVID-19. So like I said, it could be elders, it could be children, it could be health workers, it could be the firefighting teams, anybody, it could be leaders, your chief and council, the way they would look at it and the way, the average person might look at it. Expressed a personal judgment about community changes or learning following COVID-19. So if you look at the rubric, it'll remind you what basis to try and touch on. And if you look at the assignment in your course guide, it's got a list of those things right there for you as well. Let's see, anything else? I think that's it. So this assignment, I guess, in a way, is the the most academic. If we're thinking of us as adults studying history, it's important that we ask questions like this and not just accept everything that is laid before us, like to think about who wrote it and why and all that sort of thing. And if we're going to teach history, like certainly at the grade 7 and 8 level, then we want to encourage critical thinking, to not have students like, you don't learn by memorizing events and dates, but we want them to go deeper, to ask important questions about history. So I think that's about all. And I hope that you're taking this one step at a time. These are not heavy assignments. So I'm looking forward to receiving some of them. I know some people are catching up on Sarah Johnson's courses, and that's great. So, I've also connected with the student support worker at Oshkosh. So you might be getting a contact from her, just helping you to get through courses that you may be behind on. So I'm sorry that this video is so late getting posted, but it's there, and when you're ready to watch it and the others, that's great. Thank you.